morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, all of you, for coming. I'm very happy that you are quite numerous. And I'm happy that you are numerous because I think today we may have a very interesting presentation and discussion. It is a pleasure for me to say a very few words to introduce Jamie that is going to present us what I would call a very interesting and enlightening report that has been prepared by European think tank group, which is a group of 4 leading European think tanks, ECDPM, ODA, the German Development Institute, and FRIDE in Madrid. It's a report that tries to identify emerging challenges in international relations and development, and see how these challenges may impact development cooperation in the future. It is also a report, and I think it's quite timely. Timely both in terms of the internal cycle of the EU, and timely in terms of the international discussion. In terms of the internal cycle of the EU, we are now in a moment in which we have a new commission with a new commissioner, a commissioner that has a portfolio which is relatively, at least marginally increased in relation to the past, because now our commissioner is also responsible for international cooperation, in addition to development cooperation. I think this shows well how increasing complexities of our development activities. And I think on that regard, this report will be particularly useful as we define in the future what kind of content we give to this titled international cooperation and how we handle it. It is also timely in terms of the EU cycle, because we are now entering in the real implementation of the next financial protocol. So we are really on the ground, starting to implement the orientations of the agenda for change. It is also an important moment internationally. We are now starting the last phase of the negotiations for the post-2015, which will lead to a summit in September, in which we hopefully will adopt a new framework with a new set of goals, internationally agreed and universally applicable to all countries. This will be a substantial change, because we may have a framework which is universal in all countries, going well beyond the donor recipient relationship, but interested in the whole international community, with the commitment of all countries, with objectives applicable to all countries, and maybe place it in a quite different agenda. We will integrate more sustainable development and poverty, we will take more into account the drivers for growth, and we should take more into account security and good governance. So for all these issues, I think also this report could be useful as we progress and reflect and develop. Finally, not to forget that before the summit in September, there will be an important conference in Addis Ababa on financing for development. And this conference will think about the means of implementation for the new post-2015 agenda. This, of course, is very much linked to the main issues that are related to this report. So I think this report which is quite timely and quite useful for us, and I hope will be the basis for a lively discussion after the presentation. In terms of content, the report identified 5 key challenges, and then introduce them which are poverty and inequality, environmental sustainability, peace and security, democracy, human rights, and the world economic governance. I think on that there is a quite remarkable convergence between the thinking of the European Think Tank Group and the Commission thinking, since the 5 big challenges that we presented ourselves last year for 2019. I clearly progressed with the 5 ones. We have identified basic standards, drivers to improve sustainable growth, sustainable management of natural resources, equality, human justice, and peace and security. So, I think on the broad understanding of the challenges, we see a more or less in this direction, but of course this report goes beyond that and tries to highlight or propose a number of conclusions and a number of kind of actions that may be taken to tackle this. We have been already trying to tackle these challenges through the agenda for change by trying to focus on the poorest, with organization, to be more efficient through concentration, fewer sectors of concentration, better coordination between states, in particular joint programming, more attention to good governance and human rights. But of course, we can go and we should go beyond that, probably after 2015, and as we progress in our activities, in our reflection, I think this kind of report will be very important. So, to sum up, and to give the floor to Mackie, I'm very happy that he's here today, and I hope his presentation will be the basis for a lengthy debate. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gaspar.
So, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for attending this session. And thanks also to the Commission for hosting us. We are very pleased to have this opportunity, and we hope that we are presenting here something which sort of engages the Commission, but also the development community in Brussels at the European level, and more broadly the member state governments, etc., also the Parliament and the Council in a discussion. The report is presented is prepared by 4 institutes. Gaspar already mentioned them. Their logos are up there, and their websites. We've worked quite closely on this. Each of the chapters is actually written across several institutes, so it's been quite a matter of debate and a lot of negotiation. This is more important, or that is more important, that sort of thing. And there's 26 people involved in writing it, so I'm really just a representative. I can't pretend to have written the whole thing. There are actually a couple of the other authors in the room, some of my colleagues. There were colleagues from ODA and VID there last year. I don't think. The report presents 3 basic propositions. First of all, what you see in the subtitle here, that there are global problems which we're becoming ever more conscious of. The news on every day we're getting on Ebola, for instance, indicates very vivid global problem, but also the situation in Syria and Iraq. That's another problem which is very close to us, and we really need to address. So these global problems exist. We as Europeans, and with our institutions and our European structures, should be able to address them. That's really the first proposition. The second proposition is that actually the EU already has a lot of tools in place. It's not a question of creating new tools in our view. I'll run through some of them in a minute. But we think that there is a good selection of policies. There are various instruments. We have EDS functioning. So there are structures, there are policies, strategies, ways of doing things, good practice. And it's really not about creating new policies. It's more about action and improvement of action. And then the final proposition is really that we should no longer really be just focusing just on development aid. We really need to look at this in international cooperation. that it is more than just development aid. It's a very important part of that, and it's a beautiful way of contributing to solutions, but it is not everything. And I think this is one of the key points we must get. Here are the basic details about European think tank groups. We have individual websites, but there's also a unitary website which you can find this report. We presented the report February 2010, just as the new commission, well, the old commission was starting. That's the title, the banner, the cover page on that banner there. And now we just launched the new one. In fact, on the day that the new commission was being announced by Juncker, good coincidence for us. The message of the last one was very much an aid perspective about global solidarity, about the things that we have to do. And here we really feel that 4 years later we've moved on in our thinking in the agencies we work for and the think tanks we work for. And that's why we're talking now about global interdependencies and multiple channels. It's still important to invest in development. Solidarity approach is still vital, if not irrelevant. ODA may be becoming a smaller proportion of the international finance for development. It's coming out very clearly in the debate about financing post-2015. But it is a very crucial element of the financing package for development. More flexible and more can be used as a catalyst, can be more targeted than many other forms of financing. So there is still an important role to it, but it needs to be integrated into a larger approach. Why have we brought out the report now? Obviously, the start of the new commission, the new college, is a vital moment. The Parliament as well, the legislators, and the leadership is in place to start to tackle the agenda. They've got 4 or 5 years ahead of them. They really need to get down to work. So that is an opportunity. But it's more than that. 2015, as you know, is the target date for the MDGs. And as Gaspar has already indicated, there are other things happening as well. We have to discuss what replaces the MDG. There's also a discussion about financing of that. And there is a crucial climate change conference, which is also very much part of the discussion. So there are 3 moments: July for financing in Addis, September for the UN General Assembly in New York on the 2015 itself, and then the UNFCCC in Paris in December. As I said earlier, we believe the EU has the tools to make a real difference, and it's now a question of mobilizing again. If we were to be here in 5 years' time, how would we judge success? What sort of things would we be looking at and saying, well, has this improved, and has the new college and the new cycle of the EU have been moved forward? And that was our starting point in this work. Where would we want to be in 5 years' time? And these are the 5 challenges that Gaspar already referred to, and that we would want to see moving on. So is it in the world economy? Is it becoming more equitable the way it is run? Is it more resilient, less subject to shocks? Is it more democratic? These are the sort of issues we want to see on the world economy. Sustainability, clearly a fundamental issue, and will be very prominent in the SDG debate, in the debate about post-2015, as the SDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals have been put on the table last year, or early this year, as basic framework that should be used. Is the world more peaceful and secure? I mean, that was one of the challenges I mentioned, the Middle East. Are we seeing progress in that? In the last few years, we haven't really felt that there's much progress in that. In fact, many people in Europe feel less secure. Not just in Europe, but throughout the world. Is the world better governed and more democratic? Human rights, issues of governance, issues of the way democracy works, that can vary from country to country, but overall, is it more better governed and more democratic? And of course, the traditional MDG agenda, MDG 1 to 6 at least, of poverty, but also inequality. I think one of the things we've seen in the last few years is a rise of inequality in many countries in the world, including in Europe. And therefore, I think I expect that in the new goals for the post-2015, inequality will be much more prominent, not just a question of reducing or eradicating poverty, but also reducing. Let's look quickly at the five challenges in more detail. There's a chapter devoted to each in the report. I think we can see the limitations of the current approach, and we need to improve on that. We need to find a growth model for the 21st century that's more equitable, that allows countries, poorer countries, better access. We need to look at the question of trade. Can we do more for countries, least developed countries, who are not necessarily ready or not necessarily want to be involved in free trade agreements? What can we do for them? Can we do more than we do at the moment? We need to look more at the impact assessments of trade deals, sustainable impact assessments, what effect will they have on sustainability, and not just environmental sustainability, but poverty and economic sustainability as well. Equally, of investment agreements. Investment is, foreign direct investment is one of the big drivers of, one of the big components of development finance, are the agreements that regulate that. These flows, the important flows of finance, are they adequately formulated to ensure sustainable development? Also, at the moment, one of the big issues in terms of trade for the EU, and it is very evident from Mrs. Malmström's hearing just the other day, the TTIP, the Atlantic discussion on trade, is that formulated in a way that is positive for developing countries? Those are sort of the issues that we think will be particular. On financial policy coordination, we can do more to reform governance of global financial markets and international financial institutions. We know that some developing countries feel that international financial institutions are very undemocratic. China, India are even going to the lengths of setting up their own development bank. Partly it is felt because they don't feel they have the rights, well, the current institutions don't meet their approaches. There are also issues about flows, illicit flows of international flows of finance. Some of these are illicit, some of them actually hamper the ability of developing countries to raise their tax revenue. Can we do some more to regulate that and make sure that these are beneficial? Being more transparent on tax, on transfers will enable developing countries with their tax revenue collection. It will also be beneficial for us here in Europe. So many of these things are not just about developing countries, they also help us here in Europe. Climate change is probably the one that everybody is most, can see most obviously. It affects us all. Climate doesn't stop at the border, doesn't stop at the Mediterranean. It affects us everywhere. And we know that the climate agreements of the last few years have been stalling, that the COP conference of the parties is not moving particularly well. And we need an ambitious climate agreement in 2015. It is part of this overall package that is required. We also need to do more about the transition to the green economy. Here in Europe, we're already doing a certain amount. We've got certain ambitious targets in place. We're all struggling to meet them on emissions, on energy. It affects us in our daily lives. But really, that's commitment that we've shown here. We need to take it further, but it also provides us with the basis of a certain degree of credibility in the international discussions. We hope that we can encourage others to follow our example. But further steps need to be taken. Here we feel that the High Representative needs a stronger profile in climate change. That is not one of her issues, one of her competences, but we feel it would be more helpful if she had a stronger role in that area, not to replace the Commissioner, but be able to tackle that. The Development and the Environment Commissioners need to continue to work together. We've had a good track record now of joint communications on post-2015. That's very encouraging. That has to continue. Member states need to follow that lead. But it is very important that is taken further. Perhaps one area where we haven't done enough in Europe is invest in some of the strategic partnerships we will need to negotiate a good agreement on climate change. China, India have very different views on climate change and what needs to be done. Those should be important targets of European diplomacy in the next months. We need to be able to work with these countries, find solutions which work for them, but also for us. Tackling conflict and fragility. We've already talked about the spillover of unaddressed conflicts. It's very vivid to us now in Europe. We see it in the newspapers every day. The EU cannot, as such, take all the action itself. It's very much a collaborative effort. But the EU has been what we've called a best supporting actor in many cases, in many situations. And we feel that that is a valuable role. It is something that we should encourage and continue to work on, supporting the UN and other actors. The EU institutions have developed capacities to respond to conflict and address fragility. There's quite a lot of thinking going into policies on fragility and development. And we expect that development assistance will become even more focused on fragility over the years ahead. The framework of the Agenda for Change, policy document, mission, that we expect it to go that way further. In the post-2015 discussion, that will probably help. That will probably be the case as well. More aid will be directed towards the least developed countries, and particularly the fragile countries, the countries which have found it hardest to move forward in the MDG goals. But we also need member states to chip in here. It's an area where collaborative action between member states and the EU institutions is vital. We need political leadership, backup. The EU as a whole needs to work as one, and that is not always easy. So there we're suggesting that the EU could enhance its approach with much more collective decision-making, clearer collective decision-making, looking at a more creative division of labour among the institutions and with the member states. What can we do to improve that? And then perhaps we should be putting a renewed focus on conflict prevention, something which the EU has done work on in the past, which tools, conflict assessment, conflict-sensitive approaches. We know the best way to do it. There can be more emphasis on that. Democracy and human rights. It's central to our identity. It's something that we write up in large letters at the very top of the EU treaty. It's something that the EU feels is really one of its raison d'etre. And therefore has a major asset there that we can work. Obviously not everybody agrees with our approach in this thing, but I think many of the principles that we hold up there are important to citizens throughout the world. The way the EU is regarded in terms of its human rights report, for instance, is very positive. And there are increasing demands for responsive government in many countries, in many parts of the world. The Arab Spring of a few years ago is a vivid reminder of that. We'll find other cases as well. We're also in the EU committed to a broad range of rights, women's rights, minority rights. We have done a lot of thinking on that. We have policy papers at the EU level. There's a lot of understanding and common positions across the EU on that. It's really something that we've worked on quite extensively, and we have much of the tools in place. There are still gaps, however, between the way the policy thinking and the practice. The need to put that into action, and these can be addressed better. So, in our assessment, looking at this range of policies, and you'll find more details in the report, The challenge is really here also we need to deliver on these. And we find contextually relevant ways of working on this and smart, politically smart approaches. And we use our collective weight as a group of countries with considerable global influence, and we use our collective weight to promote global. Poverty and inequality. Here, of course, this is the core mandate, if you like, of this House of development cooperation. Of course, that's not to say that DG development doesn't also work on issues like we've just been discussing, but the poverty issue has been very much the focus of the last years since the MDGs were put in place. And we believe that there's more work to be done there. There's still, obviously, we need to tackle this trio of areas, tackling chronic poverty, stopping impoverishment, and supporting escape from poverty. This is relevant in developing countries. It's also relevant for us here in Europe. It is an issue that joins us with developing countries, even though maybe more acute. There is also research to show that when equality is greater, growth reduces poverty faster and more sustainably. So equality is an issue that we should be working on. And we're well aware there's been quite a bit of debate on that. There's one Liberty book, for instance, a few months ago. There's renewed attention to that in the academic field as well as in the international field. Redistribution does not hamper growth, despite what some economists would say. There is proof to suggest the opposite. Well-distributed wealth actually helps growth. And tackling poverty and inequality is also something that's at the heart of the EU project. It's something that the EU has been concerned about since the early days. All our cohesion funds, etc., are part of that effort. It's something that we have implemented inside Europe and using that example and extending that work overseas. And we need to accept that poverty is a dynamic issue. It's changing constantly. That people move in and out of poverty. That situations they get affected by crises which can push them back below the poverty line. You don't just solve poverty from one day to another. You need a dynamic approach to it. You need to look at multiple causes of deprivation, how they can accumulate and make life more difficult for people, and as a result, they lose that. So we need to go on with that effort on the reduction of poverty, maximizing the joint focus on it from developing countries, from our member states and the EU. It is clearly something that has to go on. We're not suggesting for a minute that it should stop. Calling for greater attention to international cooperation and not just to development. And we're not suggesting that this should stop, but it should be part of this. We should also think more carefully about when we're phasing out of certain countries, like the middle-income countries. The Commission has got a policy, the Agenda for Change, which suggests that we should differentiate between different developing countries, and those with more resources should be able to look after themselves, and aid from Europe is not necessarily needed. That, I think, is a sound proposition, but just simply stopping aid from one day to the next, we can all see that that's not a positive way forward. There are perhaps more constructive ways of doing that. That cooperation with middle-income countries can perhaps be less about the volumes of aid and perhaps more about the techniques and the policies. How do you run a social protection system? How do you establish insurance schemes for health or for small businesses, etc. So there are ways of working with middle-income countries that are perhaps more appropriate than large aid packages. So yes, let's fade out on the aid side, but let's also nevertheless look at if there are other things that can be done in terms of cooperation with middle-income. We've tried to summarize that in this infographic, which is to distributed on the leaflet that you've got with you. There's a lot of material there. I mean, there are copies of the books which you can have here. If there's not enough, there's only a few here. You can order them from us. We've still got copies available, and it's obviously online. But let's end with one slide on what the implications are, because I think that is really the key issue here. None of these themes are really new. We've been working on them as the EU and the development sector, the debate in the European Union with member states. We've been working on many of these for 10, 15 years. The fact that there are policies in place which are well thought through, which have been worked up, is because there is experience and there's been a lot of thinking. But we know this. These are issues we know how to tackle. But clearly there's plenty of work still to do. And we need to have integrated approaches, and policy coherence becomes extremely important. The policy coherence debate, policy coherence development, ECD as it's known, is something that the Commission and the Council have been working on since the mid-2000s, 2005, but it goes back even further to the Maastricht Treaty of 1992. So again, we've got the ideas, we know what our agricultural policy should be coherent with our development policy, our trade policy should be coherent with our development policy. And that is becoming more and more the case. And we argue that the effort should really be going on strongly on that. But to do this, we need very effective external collective action. We need the institutions to work together. We need the member states to work with them. Obviously, that's a big task. We know the difficulties involved. At the moment, what we're particularly concerned about is the way the new Commission will work. And here we were very pleased to see that one of the suggestions that we have in the book seems to be being picked up in the thinking inside the Commission already, that the groups of commissioners will work together in clusters. In the case of external action, that will be under the leadership of the High Representative. That idea of trying to break across the silos of our thinking is, we have different DGs, and we break across those and work in a joint way. That doesn't just apply to the Commission, however. That also applies in many member state governments. It work like that in silos. It even applies inside the European Parliament, where you have a committee for development issues, you have another committee for foreign affairs, another committee for trade, and okay, they move reports from one cost to the other, but they don't necessarily work jointly on the reports. And we think that would be another way to try and get more. We also need to provide to ensure that the EU delegations feel that they can take the lead in these areas, and that they can pull in the member states' embassies and work in a more definite and more purposeful way on promoting this joint action. So there are things here that the EU institutions could be doing to improve their international cooperation, their joint work, and taking an international cooperation approach into this development. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, James. I think it was an excellent presentation. I think you showed very clearly how the image is increasingly complex. A few years ago, probably the debate would have been about aid effectiveness and how to improve the donor-recipient relationship and make it more productive. Now we are in a different way, with a lot of global issues, of which aid is one part, but not the only one. There are many other issues, there are policies. People have issues of global public goods that they should be already worked on. And all this has an impact on our way of working and the way we have to, the way in which we have to think about what we are doing and what we do in the future. So, I hope this has inspired many of you to ask questions. We have here James Mackie for, I think, really 45 minutes, so we can have a discussion with you. So we now open the floor. Who wants to start?
Mackie, first of all, thank you very much. This is a tremendous amount of work. So let's go through two questions directly. The last slide is the one that addressed me the most. What should we really do about that? Because we have priority areas. So if we agree that global solutions need coherence, complementarity, and the 3 C's that we were talking about in the master sheet, if we also accept that many reports show that there is a serious way to improve that within the Commission, be it from the EPA, trade, development, and the examples that you were saying, then you have 5 areas of priority. Wouldn't the 6th one be your last slide? There is coherence. That is a priority because coherence, the 3 C's, are the 6th one to me. And without that 6th one, the other 5 don't work. So,
Okay, thank you very much. Let's take 3 or 4 questions and then I give the floor to the... Yeah, they are in the back of the room, please.
Thank you, and congratulations for your speech. My feeling, out of the 5 priorities, there is one more important, which is this climate change. And I believe we should focus more on this priority, because if next year in the Paris conference on COP21, all the countries in the world sign a binding agreement to shift to a green society, green economy, and green industry, then the only way to settle the other issue, poverty, peace, and so on. So, because my feeling, we cannot shift from this traditional society to a green one, make an ecological revolution without settling in the same time the other global challenges, which are energy, poverty, food, hydraulics, and biodiversity. So for me, we should put the focus on this conference in Paris because it will really change our world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, here in the middle of the room.
Thank you very much for an instructive presentation. I would like to know why you focus in the context of trade only on FTAs and other bilateral relationships, because you know from those FTAs that they always help the big companies for one thing, SMEs are suffering from that, not only here, but even in third countries. On top of it, you know that the Doha round, the multilateral context, is much more important for the developing countries. I would even say we need an omnilateral context here to get other stakeholders involved, and not only the national stakeholders as such.
Thank you for that. Maybe one last question before I give the floor to James again. Anybody else? Start. Okay, well, the first question on coherence. Yes, I think you're right. Coherence is vital. I mean, I also teach at the College of Europe, and there are a couple of students, ex-students in my room, and they know that I actually put quite a lot of emphasis on this question of coherence in my classes. It is a vital issue. But it's in a way, it's an approach to policy. It's part of the integrated approach that we're talking about. You have to look at not just development, you need to look at the policy in other areas as well and take a coherent approach. I don't see it as a policy area on its own. It's about the joining across, and it's a way of working. It's an extremely difficult way of working. You're never actually going to achieve perfect coherence. That is utopia, which doesn't exist. It's always something that you can improve on. So I think this is one of the key things we're saying, but we also need to think like that. And that, I think, is probably the real challenge. We're too easily, as policymakers and policy advisors and practitioners, we tend to work in particular silos. And we know that that's the best way to work. It's very difficult to work across silos. When you've got a task, you have to narrow it down to focus and get it done. But actually, that is not going to solve the problem. So
Coherence, to me, is a vital approach. It is extremely difficult to do. Very difficult to measure how do you measure a policy as being more coherent than not. We've done some thinking on that. We've got a few tools on it, but we haven't really cracked it, if you like. But it's something that we have to go on with. To the gentleman at the back, yes, climate change. I mean, we did highlight that as one of our areas here. Obviously, across the whole environmental area, there's quite a number of things. We think that that's probably the key one, the key priority. If you want to narrow down to 5 challenges, that is a big challenge. It's a practical challenge in terms of how do you do it. How do you reduce emissions? It's hugely difficult because it involves everybody, all citizens here in Europe, all over the world. There is, for many countries, it's a contradiction. Why should we deal first with climate issues when we're trying to encourage economic growth? Here in Europe, we have the luxury of prioritizing economic growth for many years, and only latterly have we come to climate. So you can understand why India or China says we need to prioritize growth first. But actually, this sort of approach will make things worse, and we need to work with it. But you're right also to point that there are various aspects to it. It's a question about water, it's a question about energy. It's very much a big influence on food and food security. But we do need to, climate is, if you like, at the center of that. And that is why the conference in Paris is so vital. Post-2015 discussion is not complete unless there is a good settlement, a good agreement achieved in Paris. We'll only be half the way there. The UN General Assembly in September will look at the goals of the next post-2015 debate, but the discussion will go on in Paris in December at the UNSCCP, and the two need to work in the second half. On the trade issue, yes, I mean, I brought out the FTA issue in the slide, but if you look at the chapter, it is indeed more complex than that. The FTAs certainly are, as we've seen with the discussions on the EPAs, the Economic Partnership Agreement, they do affect different countries at different levels of development in different ways, and there are advantages and disadvantages. So what do you do precisely about the countries which are not ready to go to the FTAs, which feel that they will be a disadvantage? Can we put more effort into that? I haven't put on the slide the issue about SMEs, about small and medium enterprises, small and medium scale enterprises, but certainly the way trade has changed international trade has changed over the last decade, and the way that many small and medium enterprises find it very difficult to penetrate trade, which is more and more inside large transnational corporations, and how do they penetrate into those? That is a big issue now, and we do need to put more emphasis on that.
Somebody wants to ask a question. So, anybody else? But I see two hands raising there at the same time. Maybe ladies first.
Thank you. I'm Leila Watson from DEVCO. I wanted to know if who this agenda is targeted at. Is it for the developing national? Is it for the Cameroonians? Is it for the European Council? And if you have had the possibility to present it to political masters, what has been the reception so far? And then another question I have is about air quality versus air quality and the implications that you can draw from your report.
Okay, so we have a follow-up question from
Yes, sorry to add a complementary question, but there is a discrepancy with the speaker, because for me, I believe in a world with limited resources, you cannot settle poverty, you cannot settle inequality, and you cannot have peace, because people will always fight for limited resources. So it means the only way to have peace and security, poverty and inequality, and even growth, is to shift to a sustainable development. Without a sustainable development, sustainable resource, we will always have inequalities, poverty, and fight.
Sorry, anybody else? Yeah.
I think that you are probably among the smartest people here in Europe. And these are indeed the five most important topics to go after. I think we should put it in our coins. You know, the €2 commemorative coins. I think we should all help and push that our national mints coin these in the next €2 commemorative coin. I'm going to support you in that.
Can you give the
Thank you, James. I can see in the fourth challenge, when you refer to democracy, and the stronger domestic component of the role states have in this process. Now, how would you say that the external actors and actors of the EU should also could support this more domestic process? Thank you.
Very pertinent question. Anybody else before I give the floor back to them? Yes.
Thank you very much. I would like to follow up on this sovereignty question, because in many ways you touch upon how states can how the borders of the state can actually be the limit of attacking the questions of the limits of the EU. You didn't mention one of the priorities, migration. You put a strong emphasis on how to regulate trade and better to get the point. But migration is not there. And I know that ECDPM is involved in a lot of that. How can you explain that?
Okay, I think there were other questions here for the time being.
The first question was about who is it addressed to. Well, we hope this is addressed to not just the development commissioner. That's precisely the point. It should be of interest to certainly the external relations commissioners, those who deal with topics that sectors that go across our borders, but it should also be for commissioners to work on issues that are internal to Europe, agriculture, those type of issues as well. And if you look at the debate next year, the post-2015 discussion that's already started, the goals that are being put on the table by the UN and by a number of reports and so on, you will find that one of the issues is universality. The MDGs was very much about developing countries. How can we get developing countries up to a different level? But now we're talking, or the discourse is now much more about what should we be looking at doing across the globe? Should these goals apply to all of us? And that rejoins a bit the question of your person sitting next to you, that actually they affect us here in Europe as well. Consumption, use of energy, these are also part of this issue. So it also affects those connections. And I mean, from that point of view, we have presented it already to the Parliament, to the Foreign Affairs Committee. We've got quite surprising ringing endorsement from Elmar Brok, which is the chairperson. So already, there is a tension there in the foreign relations group in the Parliament, and I'm hoping that we can present it further. We're trying to present it also not just here in Brussels, but also in London, in Bonn, in The Hague, and other capitals. It being suggested that it should, for the EU Euro development, we should actually hold a series of seminars around different capitals of Europe to try and get this discussion of how you actually build this approach to how you build it up and what sort of choices it means. So yes, it isn't just about it's really about the whole College of Commissioners. It's about the member states as well, and we need to extend the border. Yes, I think the points from your neighbour is perfectly correct. I mean, this is an agenda which is also about Europe, I mean, inside Europe as well as about global Europe. And if we want to see more prosperity in developing countries, then that conflicts with the use of the natural resources we have in the world. But we also need to think about, well, what consumption levels do we have here in Europe, and can these be, can we be more efficient in the way we use food or other ingredients? And 30% of our food in Europe is actually wasted. Can we think through these issues? Can we reduce our energy according to the standards we set? Maybe we need to go even further. Can we also reduce inequality here in Europe? I think this is part of the issue. A lot to fit on a €2 coin, but great. I mean, if you can get it into people's pockets and people think about it, then that's probably what you need to achieve with this sort of message that everybody thinks about. So maybe you've got the design for it. The question on Paula, yes, from the question on democracy. Yes, I mean, I think the Commission already does quite a bit on democracy support, and I don't think we're arguing here that we should be making major new policy areas at all. But clearly, I think we know from the studies that are done of how successful policies are and where there is more to do, that we can actually go further with those, that we can be more relevant in context, in particular context. We also know that it's important to work with governments and actors, multi-stakeholder actors in each context, and I think that can be done. But I think it's also that we find where much of the action is too bitty, not sufficiently integrated, that different programs are perhaps not sufficiently taken forward and not sufficiently wrapped up together, that a number of our actors, member states, Commission are not always working together on particular issues. And obviously you need to work with the willingness of actors on the ground to improve things. In the African context, there is quite a lot of discussion on how African institutions can help African countries improve their governance approaches and improve the democracy in their government. I think that sort of thing can be supported quite actively. Some effort has been put into that by the EU. I think a lot more could be. But to me, it's very much a question of building on local initiatives and building that up. I think we know that. I mean, I think we've got the knowledge and the approach. It's really a question of doing more of it and trying to make sure that those things are represented, are taken through. And perhaps also thinking, how do you improve the democracy, the democratic approach at a global level? I mean, that you set examples of democracy, democratic approaches in institutions at a global level, or in the way countries relate to each other. So there I think there's more can be done in the global. So I don't think it's just at the national level. On the issue of migration, yes, well, we had to, we felt it was important to not put everything in the report and focus on what would probably be the most important issues. So we didn't do a chapter on migration. I think a lot of us would argue also that if you tackled some of these other challenges and you really succeeded in tackling those properly, issues of inequality, issues of conflict and security, and you will find that migration actually reduced quite sharply. Not completely, because there were always the economic migrants, but much of the migrants we've seen, the pressures on migration that we've seen in the last year or so have been very much connected to conflicts. If we could solve those, I think we would be very much further. So yes, migration is an issue, but I think these other challenges are perhaps more elusive. That said, we will also need to develop our economic progress here in Europe. We need migrants for that. In many parts of Europe, Europeans will not do the jobs that are available. And so having migrants in Europe, coming into Europe, bringing extra skills and labour is, I think, important for us. But we know also that that is a very difficult political discussion. And many of our leaders find that extremely difficult to actually promote migration at the same time respond to their electorate who are saying we see migrants more negatively. So we don't have a solution to that, but I think internationally the real issue is to try and tackle security issues and inequality issues. And climate issues too also affect more climate migrants and use. That is also a thing that will help reduce migration.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have a few questions. Yeah, maybe to say a few words on two issues that were mentioned here. First, on this idea of whether we should deal with climate change or sustainability first and then poverty, or the two together. Or I think on that there was an interesting progress in the international world dealing with this issue. Not a long time ago, 2 years ago, we were dealing with these two issues separately. In the context of Kyoto 20, people were thinking about sustainability and goals for sustainability. And under the MDG track, some other people were dealing with having goals for poverty reduction. And I think it was a major improvement that everybody worldwide decided to do the two things. Because it's impossible to work for a world sustainable without being different, and the other way around. Because we cannot reduce poverty and have people growing in the same pattern of growth. We have to get them together, and I think this is one of the major progress in the discussions, is that now we have put these two agendas together, and we are discussing one single set of goals for that contribution, which is not easy. And a big part of the complication of the discussion was about that. How much poverty we put in the agenda, how much the other issue I wanted to mention is about coordination and coherence. Coordination with coherence and coordination really what clearly coherence is very important and very difficult to do. And indeed nobody is going to argue that uncoherent policies are good. So we need coherence. But it doesn't mean, even if we look for coherence, and even if we achieve coherence, it did not eliminate the issue that sometimes they are conflicting objectives. So they are trade-off, and you have to be ready to do this trade-off. And in fact, economic activities are about making this trade-off. The fact that we have to have coherence will not make this appear. Now, other questions? Yeah, maybe first there.
I am Mackie. I have a question on coherence and globalization of globality. The currents a long time, not between actors, a long time. Several days ago, the IMF has said that perhaps the budgetary orthodoxy would not be the best thing to get out of the crisis. It was said before, well, we know all that many developing countries are claiming So here, what is the level of coherence when such big actors, I would say needed actors, can go without them? How do you consider coherence in that very aspect? I would add here with a complexificating factor, I can say, globality. If you make the wrong choice and you globalize it, you are really in that shape. So here, what kind of, I would like to, I'd love to have your reaction to that. It's completely open question, but I accept no. Coming from a sector where this common made favor, organization, is very important, and I really would like to hear your reaction.
Which sector are you coming from?
From nuclear energy.
Yeah, there is a question. Maybe you can speak up.
I think the EU is most likely to succeed and most likely to fail.
That's clear.
Yes, thank you. I work with Gaspar in 2015 in DEVCO. In your report, there is a point which suddenly came a bit as a surprise. I'd like to know if you know what's behind or one of the 29 authors. It says, the EU should be more honest, selective, and strategic about where it contributes no added value in engaging in an issue and then stepping back. The EU does not need to be everywhere on all global issues. The question is because as we are making the package bigger, putting poverty, putting sustainability, putting climate, what is behind this message? Are there errors? Are there proposed goals you think you should be involved? I ask this because, as you may be aware, the issues between EU member states, etc., the EU self-empowerment is
Okay. Did you find where we can look at? Simplify your own.
Maybe a short one. From the private sector, usually, okay, objectives are nice, but solutions, the way to get to solutions are even better. So federate common goals, not only goals, but ways to get there. Your last slide again is about how to get there. What are your thoughts on maybe pushing more on the levels that would allow the objectives to get reached in terms of action?
Maybe one last question. Yes. A follow-up on the coin?
This year is the lead theme in the European Union is the balance between family life and work life. And when I was looking at the words here, how did women, youth, and artists get to contribute to this European impact? Can you explain a little bit?
Okay, so yeah, now we need one final one. You can do it. Yes.
You have mentioned that you have the tools. I'm just wondering, we often use political economy in the country. We have political economy in our way of putting here. Do we have the means to influence in terms of organization, in terms of resources, in particular maybe also in terms of services in organizations? As we talk here, we have very early assessments which have been done hand in hand. We're reducing at the same time, we're asking organizations to do more and more. I'm just wondering if it's putting everything regarding China and India and other actors, if I can all this, there's always the issue of how do we, how is our international cooperation reacting? When you're in developing countries, you realize that you can have a good policy dialogue with your counterparts, but in the end, we may have other actors coming in which are using other rules. And in fact, we may have very different responses, but in the end, it's not you who will be able to support you or to make the agenda advance. It will be the figure of China should not be able to be governments, in particular economic governments.
Okay, thank you very much. From Chris and any question. Go back to the first question on the IMF and earnings policy there. I'm not an economist, so pretend to have the answer to that. But to me, I think part of the issue, well, in two elements. One, I think we have to accept that certain policies will not always work. Mistakes will be made. And we need to be able to correct those. So yes, we may at certain points actually have policymakers saying, well, no, we're going to change to a different policy. I don't think that is surprising. But to me, I think the issue then is who is making that decision, and how much is it a unitary decision by a small group of people? How democratic is it? And for instance, particularly the IMF, I mean, many countries in the world have limited influence over it. That the way the IMF is run is not doesn't take into account the views of the players. It's still constructed on the basis of the decision-making process. It's still constructed on the basis of agreement. And I think if we change that, then approaches that the IMF or other institutions like that took positions that they could at least be more democratically, they'd be more accountable, and mistakes were made, it wouldn't be quite so much a question pointing fingers at the roots. And certainly if there are institutions at that level, it is extremely important because of the big impact that they will have. So yes, that was one of the points we put in, the democracy of global governance. It is, I think, a big issue. And I think that will affect quite a number of areas. If we were able to tackle the question of the democracy of the global institutions, I think it would make some of the negotiations which are required on climate change and so on that bit easier, because we would have institutions that were listening to different positions better. There would be a recognition in countries like China and India, the willingness to change in the Western world and in the United States. And that's how we thought would improve the dialogue. The likelihood of success, probably we should be doing an excellent assessment. But which areas which would be most likely to be successful? I wouldn't answer that. I mean, I think it's really a question that these challenges are interlinked, that they need to be tackled together, that they're all things that affect each other. If you don't tackle inequality, you may undermine security. Vice versa, if you don't tackle climate change, you will tend to the long term have a negative effect on peaceful societies, will negative effect on people's security, will encourage migration, etc. So we can't really dissociate these challenges from each other. They need to be connected to each other. You asked a question about should the EU be everywhere? We had a big debate in writing this paper because there was a number of us who were very pro-EU and a number of us who were much more skeptical about EU. And you can imagine perhaps which country we came from, but we don't need to go into that. I think the point is that even with all the resources that the EU institutions have, and let's use the EU in that limited sense, they don't have unlimited resources. Here is indicated that already. And so you do have to be selective. And I think that would probably also help the debate with member states who are more skeptical about the EU, who are able to say, fine, there's a certain division of labour here. This is something that should be handled as a group. This is something that can usefully be handled by looking member states together or one member state or something like that. That recognition of that, I think, which is recognizing the idea of subsidiarity, very old one. But if we could put that more into practice, keep that more in our minds, I think this would be probably the best way of encouraging that. And we will always get member states that become more skeptical, less skeptical in time. And I think that's an inevitable thing. You find it inside member states, with groups of people or parts of countries are more skeptical about the central authority than others. So that sort of discussion will go on. But I think it is wrong to suggest, it's not very helpful to suggest that the EU can do everything as the institution. With the member states working together, you can obviously do a lot more, but even then you can't do everything. So being selective and trying to say, well, this is, here we're well equipped, here we're able to move forward with this particular tool, I think is a sensible way forward and one which will encourage a more positive attitude among skeptics. Patrick, you had a question about solutions. Our major emphasis in terms of solutions is leadership. That actually we need to have quite strong leadership in this sort of situation. And there are various focal points for leadership in the EU, distributed around. Parliament can do a lot. The President of the Commission, key figure, commissioners, and key figures as well. But you can also have member state presidents or prime ministers who can play an important role. So first of all, leadership is, I think, one of the key things that we need to encourage, and encourage our leaders to take that up, to actually to take ownership of the leadership and use them use the decisions that they've been elected to or appointed to constructively. That is, I think, extremely important. The other is that we should. The other point that we're making, sort of generic point, is we need to work across sectors and not just inside. And that is true for the commissioners themselves, but it also applies downstream. And it applies to each one of us working in our particular field, that we need to refer to colleagues in other departments or in other DGs or wherever we work, that we have to think a bit more broadly and not necessarily focus just on our particular approach. We certainly put it into, we see it in the parliaments, that perhaps more joint work between committees and less competition. We will take part in this report and you will just comment. That's sort of attitude isn't necessarily the most constructive one. Very forward. Family life and work life, women and artists. Well, at a very practical level, I must admit that in our think tanks we're not numerous in terms of artists, and some of us have artistic necessarily one of them. Women, on the other hand, among the staff, there are at least 50% our staff are women. And I think we're very conscious of the need, of the importance of looking at gender issues and promoting gender equality. So that's certainly, I think, is important. Now, our colleague from worked in a delegation recently. Yes, I mean, I'm very aware that delegations are under quite a lot of pressure in terms of staffing, that there is more discussion about staffing levels, that it's not possible necessarily to start to keep as many delegations open as the budgets that are available. My take on that is that you need to be very strategic and you need to think what are the issues that you really need to focus on in particular places. I was sitting in a meeting with an evaluation of a particular country strategy and the way that delegation will work in to remain nameless. But you could see that certain choices have been taken upstream, which actually involve a lot of staff trying to implement properly. Perhaps the approach is too broad, that actually if we be more selective and more clear about this is really what our cooperation in this particular country is about, then it might be easier for the delegation to really focus on that and do an excellent job. Certainly that was the sort of message that seems to be coming out of the delegation. I think it is normal that the Commission has limits to its budget. We're never going to be able to get to a situation that's limitless, and so we have to make those choices. And in theory, you can be about the choices and think them through in terms of what they imply in terms of the resources that we need to do something. I think the more vital the more important that is extremely urgent and important. On the question of other actors, in the EU, we tend to think in terms of let's work out norms and rules and ways of doing it properly and what is best practice and can that best practice be translated into a sort of standard way of doing things and set standards which will achieve the best way, achieve the best approach, the best results. We are great supporters of things like the whole debate on the effectiveness of Gaspar referring to, which remains extremely important, even though it goes back a number of years now. We think in those terms and we work on it. The Chinese also have norms. They also have other ways of working. The Indians too. I mean, it's not as if their norms, they don't have norms, they have a different take on certain things. And I think that is precisely why we need to have that dialogue. Because we cannot expect our norms to necessarily be imposed on somebody else without dialogue. We do need to work that through and try and find ways or approaches which are joint approaches or common language, if you like. And so, just to say, based on our rules, they undermine our work, begs the question for me, well, obviously, how important. I mean, I think in terms of the diplomatic effort that the EU should be putting, where it should be putting its energies, I think in terms of this agenda at least, talking to some of the emerging countries more and understanding them better, I think is a very high priority.
Okay, with these wise words, I think I'm going to close this debate. But before doing that, let me thank Mackie for the presentation, his time, and also the way he engaged in the debate.
There are topics here if you want to look at one and anyone.